Good. Will you come in, mystery challenger, and sign in, please?
Jean Tierney isn't someone you might think of when you're naming Hollywood Golden Age actresses, which is kind of a shame because she has some real bangers in her filmography. Otto Preminger's Laura, Ernst Lubitsch's Heaven Can Wait, and Edmund Goulding's The Razor's Edge, and what is considered her crowning achievement, John M. Stahl's Leave Her to Heaven.
The starring roles of Jean Tierney long ago revealed her as an incomparable dramatic artist. But in the part of Ellen in Leave Her to Heaven, she gives one of the truly great dramatic performances of our time.
How can you say such wicked things? Sometimes the truth is wicked.
Tierney's life, at least to the public, was glamorous, like that of a movie star's at the time. However, it was not devoid of its struggles and tragedies. This woman went through a lot during her time in the limelight. Among them, smoking to lower her voice, a complicated pregnancy, and living with undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Through these scruples, she became outspoken on the importance of mental health treatment in the 1970s.
And you can't breathe, and it's like claustrophobia, you know. And it would have been nicer and much more understandable and to the public and to people that have been through it to know that it's a sense of panic, you know, that you can't breathe and you want to just get the air. And I think if you got your clothes off, you'd be pounding your chest for breath. You know, it's a terrible feeling.
A film of hers, in a perverse way, mirrors the struggles she endured and works as a fictionalized glimpse into how a person struggles with mental disorder. This is, of course, Leave Her to Heaven. Leave Her to Heaven follows the story of novelist Richard Harland as he falls for and gets married to Ellen Barrett, played by Jean Tierney. Their relationship unravels as she attempts to preserve their life together, as she sees fit.
The house. Let's change the name of the place from Back of the Moon to Goldfish Manor.
What's happened to you? You're deliberately whipping yourself into a fit of hysterics.
Oh, no, I mustn't do that. It might disturb Mother and Ruth or wake up Danny.
It is truly a deranged picture, which we will get back to. There have been many a think piece written about what Ellen might be suffering from, whether that be narcissism, anxiety, even bipolar disorder, which definitely is intriguing. Looking at it this way, one could make the argument Tierney knew this material, even if her own diagnosis was almost a decade off. But I do want to preface this with the fact that I am not a mental health professional, and I am not trying to say that all people suffering from bipolar disorder are villains or antagonists. This angle is coming from the framing of the Ellen character in the context of Leave Her to Heaven, and is not indicative of every living example. If anything, this is more of a cautionary tale on how a person and their support system reacts to a complicated situation regarding themselves and a loved one. I would also like to point out this video is not being used to conflate women or their experiences, but instead emphasizing the importance of the point of view when it comes to gaining a fuller picture of an important issue. But with that, let's get started. Leave Her to Heaven began as a novel by Ben Ames Williams, first published in 1944, during the heat of World War II. Before publication, Williams was already an established author, with over 20 books and over 100 short stories published in his lifetime. Leave Her to Heaven wouldn't necessarily be a standout in his bibliography, but it would go on to capture the attention of film producers at 20th Century Fox, who optioned the film rights, won them, and released the picture the following year. Leave Her to Heaven is titled after a spoken line in Shakespeare's Hamlet, in which the ghost of Hamlet's father urges his son not to seek vengeance against his mother, Queen Gertrude, for his death. The ghost urges Hamlet to leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. The ghost is telling Hamlet to let divine power rule her fate, and to let her own conscience or guilt get the better of her. For the uninitiated, Leave Her to Heaven is the story of Richard and Ellen and the eventual decay of their relationship. Richard, a famous novelist, meets Ellen while on a train. She's falling asleep, reading his latest novel, and flatteringly insults his work.
I give you my word, it's weeks since I read the thing.
It must have impressed you enormously.
The book? Not particularly. Rather a sloppy job, I thought.
I agree with you.
You do?
Intrigued by the young woman, Richard discovers he's staying with mutual friends of Ellen's, and a full-blown affair ensues. Ellen's fiancé arrives, seemingly to interrupt the romance, but she rebuffs him, leaving him dejected and spiteful. She announces to the vacationers that she and Richard are to be married. Soon after, they have a wonderful few weeks of bliss isolated from the rest of the world. Richard wants Ellen to meet his younger brother, Danny, who was crippled due to polio. During a surprise visit from Ellen's family, Ellen's mother warns Richard that Ellen is prone to loving too much, to the point of obsession.
What's wrong with Ellen?
There's nothing wrong with Ellen. It's just that she loves too much.
Danny moves in with the couple, spawning Ellen's jealousy further.
Now we can, all three of us, go to back of the moon. Can't we, Dick? Can't we?
Danny, wanting to surprise Richard, has secretly been attempting to swim across the lake on their property. After a suggestion from Ellen, Danny tries once again, only to get a cramp and drown. Presumed an accident, Ellen is cleared from all suspicion. Now despondent, Richard tries his best to deal with his own feelings by having a baby with Ellen, something Ellen's sister, Ruth, had suggested. Ellen becomes pregnant, and disgusted at her rapidly changing shape and the possible redirection of Richard's affections towards the unborn child, throws herself down a flight of stairs to induce a miscarriage, which proves successful. Ruth confronts Ellen about her actions, which Richard overhears, and without sufficient evidence, though, Richard doesn't believe he can go to the authorities about Ellen, but leaves to distance himself from her. In the meantime, Ellen sends a letter to her ex-fiancé, who's also just a district attorney, claiming Ruth was plotting to murder her.
And then the truth, the awful truth, began to dawn on me. The reason for the change was Ruth. Russ, they love each other and want to get rid of me. When Richard suggested a divorce, I went to Ruth and begged her to give him up. She said she intended to have him and would stop at nothing. I told Ruth I would never give Richard a divorce, and it was then that she threatened to kill me.
While on a picnic, she drinks sugar laced with arsenic, which slowly kills her. Ruth is charged with Ellen's murder, but is acquitted after Richard claims Ellen contrived the plot to punish himself and Ruth for a seeming budding relationship. Richard is charged as an accessory to Danny's murder for withholding information regarding Ellen's involvement. After serving a 2-year sentence, Richard returns home and is greeted by Ruth. Now, there's a lot in Leave Her to Heaven that would be eye-catching to readers and actors alike. The dramatic intrigue, fully drawn female characters, the subtext, you name it. But 20th Century Fox had to alter just a few aspects of the story in order to pass the production code. The screenplay, penned by Joe Swirling, was given the note, "It will be absolutely essential to remove any flavor that Ellen plans to murder the unborn child merely because she is misshapen. It should be definitely established that her reason for murdering the child is that she thinks that the newborn will replace her husband's affections. This is important in order to avoid any of the flavor that is normally connected with what would be termed abortion." I do agree with this assessment. This moment would be shockingly shallow if Ellen were to induce a miscarriage simply because she isn't as desirable as she was pre-pregnancy.
I don't even see my husband.
Why don't you have him come in here?
Because I don't want him to see me this way.
That doesn't make sense.
Adding to the insecurity of Richard's love, being diverted is not only within her character, but is also more harrowingly tragic. The dampening of Richard and Ellen's sensual affair was also reinforced, but not much else was minimized or rejected in the scripting phase of production. The centerpiece of the story, Ellen, is also an attractive part. There's a lot to like about Ellen as a character, mostly from an actor's viewpoint. In order to portray someone who comes across as a monster in the back half of the film, an actor would at first have to be charming, beguiling, tempting enough to lure her prey into falling in love in the early scenes. And in those early scenes, the seduction would have to be such that it is nearly impossible to believe a man like Richard couldn't love a woman like Ellen.
You were waiting for me, weren't you?
Yes. And you came, didn't you? Well. Good night.
A woman so devoted to her husband spits out witticisms at the dinner table and rides a horse like no woman ever, and all with a sense of foreboding.
Oh, I'm quite psychic.
Oh. And is your sister psychic too?
Oh, yes, much more than I am.
And besides, I don't want anybody else in the house but us.
Ever?
Ever.
Lynn's going to win.
No, Ellen. Ellen always wins.
A person so menacing and so passionate, hiding dark secrets in plain sight, would be a career-defining role for anyone to play. But who, among the 20th century stable of stars, would be called upon to play her? Gene Tierney didn't intend to become a movie star. It was kind of an accident. A child of decadence and bored with high society by the age of 17, she decided to pursue an acting career. She carved out a name for herself on Broadway before heading to Hollywood, only to turn right back around to Broadway after waiting around for a year without much of a filmography to show for it. After a performance of The Male Animal, she was approached by a talent scout. She writes in her autobiography, Self-Portrait, "I shrugged and said, come to me with a contract saying I will be put in a picture right away and I may consider it." "You're a nervy one," he said, amused. "No, I'm just happy with what I'm doing. I don't want to go back to Hollywood, so why bother to talk to me? I'm busy." And I closed the door. She was not about to fall into the trap of once again being put on standby. But after some convincing and negotiation from her agent, her father, she signed with 20th Century Fox. It was during the second run at stardom where she first encountered an up-close example of mental illness. She writes, "Frances Farmer fell ill. I heard the crew buzzing and gossiping about her. She had thrown a brush at one of the hairdressers, had a tantrum on the set, and literally snarled at people. I was puzzled by her behavior and by the crew's lack of sympathy for her. I did not know how to react. I never dreamed, of course, that I would someday share her status, the role of casualty." Frances Farmer is perhaps more well known for her involuntary institutionalization than her film career. Her story, that of rising star to psychiatric patient, was highly publicized and often misreported. Events like the one described by Tierney in her autobiography were well known and sensational. Farmer literally screaming to the world she was not okay was met with intrigue and fascination, yet also with ambivalence. No one suggested that she should seek help. If someone said she had been acting crazy, Tierney writes, it took to mean difficult and abrasive. The experience scared Tierney, who was just beginning to make a name for herself in Hollywood. She, of course, felt for Farmer, but in terms of knowing how to support her, had no idea what to do. She was in the throes of her own struggles. Her marriage to Oleg Cassini had proved controversial with not only her parents, but the greater Hollywood population. They had eloped to her mother's disapproval and found it difficult to find acceptance among the other stars. After wrapping her film Son of Fury, Tierney was invited to co-star Tyrone Power's house, which Tierney assumed was a personal invitation for a double date. They arrived to see that it was a large house party. I was quiet on the drive home. We'd still not made the grade with our circle of actors and actresses. I felt like a child with my nose pressed against the candy store window. Tierney was also rushing from project to project without a rest, sometimes wrapping a film in the morning and starting shooting that afternoon. Her husband, Cassini, found work scarcely and was resentful of having a wife who not only paid most of their bills, but came home exhausted most nights. At this point, Tierney and Cassini had one child, whom Cassini was not too keen on raising himself. Their daughter, Daria, had been born deaf, blind, and mentally disabled due to an infection of rubella, or German measles, Tierney had contracted while doing a show to promote the war effort. She recalled an encounter with someone who had been at that show. "You know," she went on, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but almost the whole camp was down with German measles. I broke quarantine to come to the canteen to meet the stars. Everyone told me I shouldn't, but I just had to go." She beamed and then added, "And you were my favorite." I stood there for a very long minute. There was no point in telling her of the tragedy that had occurred. I turned and walked away very quickly. After that, I didn't care if I was ever again anyone's favorite actress. Tierney never pondered who to blame for this seeming unfairness, and her other child was born without complications. Her relationship with Cassini, though, would continue to deteriorate, leading to a separation and divorce. Her parents, too, were experiencing their own troubles. A rift in their relationship led to Tierney's father, Howard, divorcing her mother to marry her mother's best friend. Amidst the chaos of this, Tierney discovered the foundation Howard had founded, the Belle Tier, basically a way to keep Tierney's acting earnings safe until she needed it, was worth nothing. Howard had been using Tierney's salary to pay off his year's worth of debt, leaving her with hardly any savings. This, in connection with her parents' divorce, devastated her. "In my own mind," she writes, "the two were connected. The amount of money he stole from me was about $30,000 over a period of 2 or 3 years. It was not a huge sum, but large enough to a desperate man. And he was desperate. Had he come to me, I would have given him that much and more." All this was going on behind the scenes, getting successfully buried and lived only by Tierney and those around her. On the outside, she was a lovely, talented actress, not leaving a hair out of place. But inside, she, like Frances Farmer, was screaming. This suppression of feeling, these lived experiences, would culminate with the role of Ellen Barrett in Leave Her to Heaven. In her book, Tierney is very brief about the film. On Ellen, she writes, "Although treated subtly in the book and the movie, Ellen was without a doubt insane. She believed herself to be normal and worked at convincing her friends she was. Most emotionally disturbed people go through such a stage, the equivalent of an alcoholic hiding the bottle." She writes here with a level of, I think, judgment, but also with sympathy. Clearly, she knows Ellen is afflicted with a misunderstanding of the world around her, yet likens it to an alcoholic doing their best to hide said affliction, to keep things from becoming too messy. Now, Ellen is not a drunkard, and neither was Tierney, but Ellen does do a good job at hiding her true actions from those who matter most to her, i.e., Richard.
Oh, darling, forgive me. I'm sorry. I can't help it. It's only because I love you so. I love you so I can't bear to share you with anybody.
Tierney's success in bringing Ellen to life lies in the layers that the character possesses. As mentioned, she's friendly yet chilly, sensual yet frightening, dominating yet docile. The script gives her many chances for subtext in lines that are otherwise read as encouragements.
Can I swim all the way across today?
Think you could make it?
Why, sure. I made it 3/4 yesterday and I wasn't a bit tired.
All right.
The scene that demonstrates her extreme jealousy for the first time is when she discusses Danny's cohabitation with herself and Richard with his doctor.
Mrs. Harlan, what do you want me to do?
I want you to tell my husband that it would be better for Danny to stay here at Warm Springs.
But that isn't true. It would be much better for him to go to Back of the Moon.
But surely it could do no harm for him to stay here or perhaps go back to school. And if you'll only tell my husband...
Why don't you tell him?
Because coming from you... Richard.
Hello, Doctor.
Oh, Richard, I've got such wonderful news. Dr. Mason has just consented to let Danny come with us to Back of the Moon.
A crack in the facade forms here. This is reinforced by the ominous phrases her parents used to describe her early in the story.
Nothing ever happens to Ellen.
Ellen always wins.
Tierney's ability to walk the line between seductive and dangerous is tantalizing, especially in how she's able to continually sway Richard's affections and sympathy. She received good notices from critics. Pauline Kael called her evil, beautiful, and got her first and only Oscar nomination for Best Actress, alongside Ingrid Bergman in The Bells of St. Mary's, Greer Garson for The Valley of Decision, Jennifer Jones for Love Letters, and Joan Crawford for Mildred Pierce. As is well known, Crawford would win for a similar femme fatale. Now, I wanted to lay out the plot of the film and Tierney's life leading up to playing Ellen in a deliberate attempt to parallel Tierney's life with Ellen's because, in a perverse way, Ellen is a reflection of Tierney, only taken to a dramatic extreme. Important to note, though, is the framing of the narratives. The understanding of Ellen's character isn't through Ellen, but through Richard. His point of view is crucial in helping to get a full picture into how Ellen operated within the construction of their relationship, that of the concerned party. Tierney's autobiography is conveyed through herself as the narrator, privy to every thought and pontification she has, or that of the sufferer, and this is key in two ways. 1. Ellen's actions are understood or rationalized through another person who inherently has a bias. The framing of Leave Her to Heaven is that of Richard's attorney recounting the story to a rando, and we can seemingly glean that he knows only what Richard has told him.
Yet of all the people involved, I suppose I'm the only one who knew the whole story.
So how the attorney knows about events that happened while Richard wasn't there, we can just maybe theorize Richard created on his own to help with this case, but I digress. An interesting note found in the Criterion Collection essay included with the physical release of the movie, authored by Megan Abbott, says, "The first clue to Leave Her to Heaven's subversive, sympathetic view of Ellen lies in its narrative frame, taken from the novel. The movie begins with Richard returning from prison and into the care of his friend and attorney Glenn Roby, played by Ray Collins, also the lawyer for the Barrett family. The rest of the movie then unfolds in flashback. We understand from the start that Roby's allegiances are with Richard, and any insight into Ellen will have to be gained through the story's seams. Men rule the narrative. Men make the rules, but Ellen will not follow the rules." We learn information as Richard learns it, and only learn what he asks, or what is told about. Therefore, we don't really learn much about Ellen's childhood because Richard isn't told, or he doesn't ask. We don't get to learn why Ellen is how she is, except for this brief explanation from her mother.
What's wrong with Ellen?
There's nothing wrong with Ellen. It's just that she loves too much. Perhaps that isn't good. It makes outsiders of everyone else, but she can't help it. You must be patient with her. She loved her father too much.
We only understand that she is this way, and everyone walks on eggshells to make Ellen happy. Now I'm going to draw a comparison to Ordinary People, which I've done a video on, where the mother in that story, as emotionally withdrawn as she is immediately at a disadvantage to the story because we never get her point of view. We learn about her through the observations of her husband and son. The bias lies not only in a lack of information, but that of Richard's feelings towards Ellen. At once repulsed by her, yet wanting to care for her, his insistence at having a baby, for example, is not unfounded, but rather a valid and understandable attempt at wanting them to be closer. In 2023, it's really easy to say something like, "Girl, wash your face," but in the 1940s, having a baby was indeed a viable option for attempting to save a marriage. Wife has a bit of a temperament? Have a baby. You're fighting all the time? Have a baby. Your husband's high on goofballs? Have a damn baby. A catch-all for sure, but one very steeped in outdated ideals. Leave Her to Heaven was released mere months after the end of World War II, so men would be coming home to greater economic prosperity than ever before, and that meant, of course, being able to afford to have a family. And I would also kind of understand the adverse effect here, that of a loss of independence for women through having a child. During the war, women were granted previously unobtainable levels of independence in their personal and professional lives. But upon their husband's return, how would one grapple with going backwards when going forward was so promising, especially if you were good at what you did? And Ellen is obviously not affected by the war in the story, but the attitudes of a post-war feminist ideal can definitely be read into and massaged into the narrative. Further, earlier in the film, it is mentioned Ellen's biological father has passed away, and she is reeling from the loss.
Well, I must admit you've aroused my curiosity. If I should get an opportunity to meet your father...
That's hardly likely, Mr. Harland. My husband...
We've come here for my father's funeral.
Jesse Pasternak, writing for Establishing Shot, a blog for Indiana University, says, Berendt is a complicated anti-heroine who does horrible things to cope with the trauma of losing her father and her fear of losing Harland. And yeah, I totally get it. While a lot of reviewers tend to focus on the iciness with which she takes action, a substantially smaller amount consider the reason for her actions. They, like the characters, just kind of accept that Ellen is cold-hearted and not a scared person doing desperate things to preserve her relationship. But as Colin McGuigan for Writing the High Society writes, the reasons for her murderous possessiveness are never explained. There is the obvious attachments to or obsession with her late father, yet this only partially explains her behavior. What matters, though, is not so much why these impulses exist, as the fact that they do. The only person to understand why Ellen did the things she did was Ellen. And unfortunately, by the time people come around to asking questions, trying to figure out the why, she isn't there. So her actions are being interpreted with the reveal of Ellen's true character in mind. The scene where Ellen's family makes a surprise visit, for example. When they are approaching via boat, Ellen hides. She doesn't want to participate in their sing-along. People who suffer from anxiety often have difficulty with transitions, especially sudden transitions. So a way to read this is Ellen's insecurities getting the better of her, and her poor reaction isn't due to jealousy, but anxiety. This insecurity or anxiety can also be seen in the scene where she accuses her sister of trying to foster a relationship with Richard.
If you must know, I'm going away because I can't stand living in this house any longer. The whole place is filled with hate. Your hate.
Not hate, love, Ruth. Richard's love for me. All these weeks I was in the hospital, helpless. You had him here in the house to yourself. But it didn't do you any good, did it? He still loves me more than ever. That's what you can't abide. That's why you envy me, isn't it?
I don't envy you, Ellen. All my life I've tried to love you, done everything to please you. All of us have. Mother, father, and now Richard. And what have you done? With your love, you wrecked Mother's life. With your love, you pressed Father to death. With your love, you've made a shadow of Richard. No, Ellen, I don't envy you. I'm sorry for you. You're the most pitiful creature I've ever known.
Richard's own read of the events of the film are being interpreted by the feelings he harbors post-trial, so this interpretation of the story by the attorney is biased away from understanding Ellen. In Richard's mind and to the audience, Ellen has failed as a sister, a daughter, a mother, and a wife. 2. Tierney's autobiographical account gives a possible, fuller understanding to Ellen's actions, or at the very least, helps bridge some gaps. Throughout Self-Portrait, Tierney clearly spells out the factors that formed her into who she is. Extensive flashbacks to her childhood, that of decadence and boredom, give the reader a baseline for Tierney's journey from gleeful child to unhappy adult. But we are with her every step of the way. The topics that tie her to Ellen, physical disability, troubled pregnancy, unequal marriage dynamics, and strained parental relationships, kind of raise a question of whether or not the film could be triggering to someone like Tierney. The brevity with which she speaks about the film is disheartening, but maybe telling.
The first requisite for an actor or an actress, everybody knows the motion picture business, is the strength of an ox.
Of course.
You know that too.
Oh, my. Yeah.
The pressures, you gotta be strong physically.
Pressures are incredible.
She knew this part, but the extremes in which Ellen went to preserve her relationship were where the line could be drawn. In Self-Portrait, she thanks John M. Stahl for allowing me to play Ellen as I understood her. The ethics of an artist subjecting themselves to material that closely mirrors or relates to their personal struggles, I think, is an important conversation. A lot of performers learn to draw upon personal experience in order to create truth for their character, especially if they haven't experienced what's actually going on with the character within the story. You can base your reactions from similar experiences and forge honesty through comparison. Tierney was not a method actor, as this type of acting champions raw, personal experiences, but the realism with which she plays Ellen had to come from somewhere. But can it be said that playing Ellen may have exacerbated the symptoms of her then undiagnosed bipolar disorder? Tierney does not draw a direct line between Ellen and her subsequent visits to mental institutions. She does say, however, that eccentric behavior is not routinely noticed around a movie set. It was the fashion in my time, still is, to feel that all actors and actresses are neurotic, or they would not be actors and actresses. Many who said this actually believed it. Some were, and a few even knew what the term meant. When she found that not even a change of scenery to film a new movie was fighting off this depression she was feeling, that she was instead becoming combative, she knew something was wrong.
I was making a film there, and I kept saying to people, you know, I don't think anybody likes me. And little by little people would say, well, gee, maybe you're ill, you know. And one or two people said, maybe you want to go to a psychiatrist. I thought, a psychiatrist, me? You know, what's happened? I've always been such a strong person, and little by little it snuck up on me.
Tierney would not go on to end her life as Ellen had, going down in a blaze of moral ambiguity. But moments in her future would lead her to understand why a person would do what they do when they are mentally unwell. In 1953, she began to have issues with her concentration, leading to dwindling film prospects. She sought help at the insistence of Humphrey Bogart's sister, also named Frances, and went on to face 27 shock treatments to alleviate her depression. I tried to escape and was chased and pounced upon like a loose dog. I had been subjected to electric shock treatments that deadened my brain, stole chunks of time from my memory, and left me feeling brutalized. Her condition was not well understood then, and Tierney's mother remarked on how quickly Tierney overcame it. But it wouldn't last.
It's a horrible thing to discuss. I don't want to scare you half to death. It scared me half to death, but anyhow, you don't know you go into convulsions, but when you come out of it, you're what they call high, just like someone who's had too much to drink. And you're happy and you're over your depression, but it sometimes only lasts a month, and then you're right down again in the same spot.
In 1957, Tierney stood on a ledge 14 stories up in her mother's apartment building in a suicide attempt, and she was admitted to the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas. She writes in her autobiography of a medical staff that truly does understand the hardships and conditions of their patients, treating her very well despite going through more shock treatments. She writes, "I accepted my sickness and quit fighting my confinement, but you do walk a fine line. The danger isn't getting too secure, too comfortable. In time, the doctors would have to prod me to get out. But get out she did."
So I went to work in a store and had a lot of fun, and it just was killing time seeing the doctor twice a week. Now I see a doctor once a month, and I don't know what for half the time. He doesn't either. But when I don't feel well, it's a nice company feeling to know I can go and talk to a doctor. And be given medicine that helps me.
Her film career never quite made a comeback, but she was able to pick her own projects as she pleased and do as much with Hollywood as she wanted. Her bipolar disorder would occasionally rear its ugly head, but now had supports in place in case she fell into another depressive episode. She would go on to do interviews with talk show hosts, candidly discussing her condition and the importance of mental health, which, to me, needs to be championed.
I think I had a weakness, and it was just that things started piling up on me, And when you realize that 1 out of 10 people in the United States today have trouble with mental illness, to some degree or other, And I think if I had a quieter life, perhaps it wouldn't have surfaced.
And while Tierney felt like she had, like Ellen, failed as a mother, a daughter, and a wife, she just needed the right combination of outside factors to succeed despite her illness. The love of one person, insisting they tackle the problem together without any external guidance, is not the solution. Rather, creating a network of people and resources to provide stability and consistency casts a much wider, safer net. Not all people who suffer from bipolar disorder or mental illness find the level of support Tierney did. She was fortunate to have connections and relationships in place that would prove her to be a successful case. Representation of those who are able to confront their illness, live with it, and find solace in those who are willing to help them is important and empowering. Future Hollywood films would go on to depict mental illness with much more sympathy, such as 1948's The Snake Pit. And while far from perfect, it definitely paved the way for mental illness to be explored in ways that help the average American understand factors that may lead to a mental breakdown and the pressures someone might feel once they are again sent into the world. There is definite sympathy to be had for characters like Ellen, unable to find that level of support, but we can be grateful for advocates like Tierney, who work not only as an extension of the character, but as a mouthpiece on how to overcome the parallel issues that they're facing as well. The truth is, anyone struggling with mental illness is more than likely suffering in silence, right in front of you, and you don't even know it. In a time where mental illness and its effects on people were misunderstood, Tierney stood head and shoulders above her contemporaries on getting the word out in an era where being unwell had little nuance. Today, celebrities can take advantage of their public positions to raise awareness to mental health, and Tierney should definitely be thanked for that. Jean Tierney may not make your list of golden age Hollywood actresses, but know she's right there waiting for you, hiding in plain sight.